I'm gonna hide behind the mountain. I'm gonna hide behind the mountain.
The Apostle Church of Christ in God has roots in the Church of God Apostolic. And the founding presider of that organization was Bishop Thomas J. Cox. He actually organized the church in 1897, but in 1915 he heard the apostolic doctrine preached by Bishop R.C. Lawson. And while many people today will not know Bishop Lawson, they are very familiar with one of his most outstanding sons, the late Bishop William L. Bonner, who had a very close relationship with the ACCG for about 12 years or more. And when Bishop Cox heard Bishop Lawson, who was Bishop Bonner's pastor, preach the apostolic doctrine, he accepted that, got baptized in Jesus' name, and received the Holy Ghost. And again, that was in 1915. And he served as their presiding bishop really from 1897 until 1943. And he was in turn succeeded by co-presiding bishops, Bishop M. Gravely out of West Virginia, and Bishop Eli Neal out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, who was my father's pastor. And after 2 years, Bishop Gravely resigned, and because of personal reasons, and left the Church of God Apostolic, and Bishop Neal continued as the presider. And around 1941, there was some disagreement. I think I made a mistake here on these figures here. But around 1941, there were 5 ministers who were part of the Church of God Apostolic who had become concerned about some of the administrative procedures of Bishop Neal and wanted to make some changes. And when that conference or that discussion did not lead to the changes, then 5 of those ministers decided to pull out and start the Apostle Church of Christ in God. They were namely Bishop J.W. Audrey, Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr., Bishop J.J. Jenkins, Elder J.M. Williams, and Elder W.R. O'Brien. And of the 5, Bishop Audrey, Elder Audrey was consecrated bishop and became the first presiding bishop. And there were 3 churches in the beginning. Bishop Audrey pastored one of the churches, Bishop Richardson pastored one of the churches, and I believe the 3rd pastor at that time was Elder J.M. Williams. And then Bishop Audrey served as the presider from 1941 until 1956. And I think one of the, probably one of the most outstanding accomplishments during the administration of Bishop Audrey was the number of churches that joined. From 3 churches initially, it expanded to a number of churches in North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. And in the early 1950s, Bishop R. O. Dobb, at that time he was Elder Dobb, had become the state overseer of Pennsylvania and pastored in Philadelphia, felt that there should be a change in the presider from Bishop Audrey to Bishop Richardson. But the board of pastors did not agree with him and kept Bishop Audrey. And so in 1953, Bishop or Elder Dobb pulled out, was consecrated bishop, and started the Shiloh Apostolic Temple organization. The name of his church in Philadelphia is still the Shiloh Apostolic Temple. And in 1956, for whatever the reason, I can't recall the reason, Bishop Audrey did step down as the presiding bishop, stayed in the organization. And Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. became the 2nd presider in 1956 and served until 1995. So he served as presider for 39 years. And there were any number of accomplishments. More churches were connected with the body. We had churches in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York, and for a while Delaware. But the organization really began to grow tremendously. Especially in Virginia, North Carolina, there was a strong contingency of churches. And in 1970, Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. went to the Board of Pastors and said he was preparing, after my mother passed in 1968, Bishop Sr. went to his pastors in 1970 and said he was going to marry a woman who was divorced. And from what was shared with me, only one pastor objected to Bishop Sr. marrying a woman who was divorced, and that was our late Vice Bishop, Bishop W.J. Jackson. And he asked Bishop to pray about it and reconsider. All of the others encouraged him to go ahead and do it. And I'm told that I was not in the meeting. I was an ordained elder. No, I was not an ordained elder. Yes, I was. I was an ordained elder at that time, but I was not pastoring. I was told that Bishop Senior gave them two options, that if they were not in agreement with it, he would either marry, at that time her name was Sister Harris, and step down as presiding bishop, or not marry her and stay presiding bishop. They told him to marry her and stay presiding bishop. Right after that occurred, after the marriage, then there was a meeting held, if memory serves me correctly, it was at the Progressive Apostolic Church in Winston-Salem, then pastored by Bishop Carton, I believe. I don't think he had died at that time. I'm not sure. He may have died, and Bishop Lee Grant may have been the pastor of the church. Well, he is the pastor of the church now. But the purpose of that meeting was to say that they could no longer be a part of the ACCG since their presider had married a woman who was divorced, whose former husband was still living. And that was a very traumatic experience, one that is still at times very fresh in my mind. I saw the work that my father and Bishop Jackson and others had done over a period of 40 years crumble in a period of 40 minutes, and that just devastated me. I was in my 20s when that happened. And but writing about it later in my thesis and then in a book, it made me very aware that as many positives as we have in the Oneness Pentecostal Apostolic Church, one of the glaring negatives is how often we split. In the first book that I wrote, chapter 2 was We Multiply by Dividing. And at some point, it's my hope that we can learn how to resolve problems and issues and differences without separating, but see if we can come up with solutions and still stay together. My father went home, and as I said, in 1995, and then I became the third presider and have held the position since 1995. It's an honor. It's overwhelming at times to know that in the 75-year history of this organization, only 3 men have held the title presider: Bishop J.W. Audrey, Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr., and myself. And it's an honor that I'm still trying to feel worthy of. One of the things that I pray that will happen in the coming years is, since we've changed our planning conference to a conference on church growth and leadership, is to look at very practical ways that we can grow our individual congregations and also grow the organization by additional members in the current churches, but also by adding other independent churches, but encouraging those who feel a call to pastor to go out and plant new ministries. And so through the Church Growth and Leadership Conference, that's one of the objectives that we want to implement from that. And so that will begin in 2017. And I'm excited about it because I think it's time to turn the page. I think it's time to keep in mind what has transpired in the past, what's transpired in the present, but how are we preparing for the future here in the present. And I'm really excited about what I believe is about to happen. I think we're on the cutting edge of experiencing extraordinary growth in the ACCG spiritually, financially, and numerically, and I'm excited about that.
High behind the mountain, I'm gonna hide behind, high behind the mountain.
The first was in 1952 in Newport News, Virginia, when Bishop Sr. was consecrated bishop. I was about 7 years old then, and it was exciting, but it was also scary because as a 7-year-old boy, we were sitting in chairs, we being my father, my mother, my sisters, and I, and the ministers were circling us, anointing us, and praying for us, and of course they were getting happy. And again, as a 7-year-old boy, I'm trying to figure out, why y'all hitting my head this hard and jumping around and, but it was an exciting time because I recognized that something special was happening for my father. And so that was probably my earliest memory of it. Also, one year, and I don't remember what year it was, but it was in the 50s, we had the convocation, again, it was called the General Assembly, in Goldsboro, North Carolina. That happens to be the home of Mother Earlene Till out of Washington, D.C., St. James, and also Bishop Jacqueline Foy. They grew up in the same home church. It's called the original St. Paul Apostolic Church in Goldsboro. But we had a flood. That Saturday, I think it was after service, it just started pouring down, raining, just raining. And of course, Goldsboro's going down east and it's flat land. And when we got up that Sunday morning to come for the closing service, there was water 3 feet high. Nobody considered trying to get out of Goldsboro, and we had delegates from as far away as Pennsylvania and New York. I remember on the choir that Sunday morning, the mass choir, one of the leaders was Brother Eugene Jones, who was our late senior bishop's oldest son, Bishop Melvin Williams. And he led a song, and then I think I led one with him. But nobody even considered leaving. The brothers, as they were able, drove their vehicles to the church, got cinder blocks and put 2x4s on the cinder blocks so that you could get out of your car, take your shoes off, roll your pants legs up, and walk. And the ladies, they had their dresses on, they didn't have on the stockings, and took off their shoes, and we walked to the church. I mean, it was no big deal. Nobody even thought about not coming to church. Nobody thought about leaving. While we were in church that Sunday morning, the Lord sent the sunshine. It dried up all of the rain. When we got out of church, there was no mud, there was no water. Everything was dry. It was like the Lord said, since you sacrificed to praise me, I'm going to bless you. And when we came out, I mean, it was just so amazing. As a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever age I was, that's an experience I'll never forget. That nobody even thought about leaving and not being in the closing worship. So that's another experience. Another one was in 1968. Two things happened that year. In the General Assembly, my father became ill, and that Saturday night he fell out. We didn't have air conditioning in the church then, and the church was not as large as it is now, and it was jam-packed. And I think all of the heat generated, because it was in the summer, and he just got overheated from the work that he had been doing leading up to the convention and having it. He fainted. And of course we had to call we didn't have rescue squads then. Ambulances from the funeral homes would come and pick you up and take you to the hospital. And so they carried my father to the hospital. But that Sunday morning he got out of the hospital, came back, and for the closing of the convention, people were just rejoicing. But that same year, my mother also went home to be with the Lord in October of that year. So those are some outstanding, some events from past years that I can recall. And I don't remember what year it was, but the sister from St. Matthew, I can't think of her name.
Stephanie Sherrill.
Sister Stephanie.
Sherrill or Gabriel.
One, yes, she died and we had prayer, and the Lord brought her back. And I don't remember what year that was, but it's an experience that's etched in the minds of a lot of us, and we'll never forget that. And two other things. One, the ACCG has had 2 national recordings. I can't remember what year the first one was, but it was in the 1980s. But the last one was in 1997. And we recorded live right here at Mount Sinai. In the 80s, the church was not as large. I don't believe it was. I don't think we were in the new church, but I just cannot remember. I think it was either the late 1970s or early 1980s when we had that first recording. And the thing that was so inspiring is that all of the songs on the albums were written by people who are part of the ACCG. And that was another way of letting me know that the Lord had blessed us with extraordinary talent here in ACCG.
I'm going where Chile, chilly wind don't blow. Something else I came to realize, I know that Jesus is.
Well, in 2015, it was a very challenging year in terms of the leaders that the Lord called home. It was the first year in my ministry, going back to 1967, that I have preached funerals of so many people who are close to me. Some of them were members of Mount Sinai, some were part of the ACCG, starting with Mother Rubina Hairston, who was our oldest member. She was the mother of our senior elder, Elder Howard Hairston. She went home in February 2015. And then in April, my mentor, Bishop William L. Bonner, whom the Lord placed in my life the same year he called my father home. I went to New York for his homegoing. And then in May, as you know, we eulogized our first Vice Bishop, Bishop Joseph Bellari, on the first Saturday in May. And then the second Saturday in May of 2015, we eulogized Elder Harry Milner, who had been our General Secretary. Then during the convocation, I believe it is, we received word that Mother Bertie Jones, who was the wife of our senior bishop, went home to be with the Lord. And then later that year, Sister Shirley Milner, who was a lifelong friend of my wife, they grew up together at Greater New Bethel, which is my wife's home church. Her father was the founding pastor, Bishop R.L. Hairston. We had to eulogize her, and then finally, in October, we had to eulogize our senior bishop, Bishop Melvin Jones. And so, and then also as a part of that year, my nephew, Reverend Marlon Milner, who was the son of Elder Harry Milner, and my older sister, Sister Jeanette Richardson Milner, had to eulogize his wife, Sister Diana Milner. I don't recall a year when I've had to do so many eulogies of people who were so very close to me. And there were people who seemed to have felt that God was punishing the ACCG. I mean, you know, you lose 3 of your primary leaders in a matter of months. And in the case of Bishop Laurie and Elder Milner, in a matter of a week or so. And so the Spirit spoke to me when I went to prayer. He said, why are people looking at this as a negative? I'm calling home my children to give them a reward. And it's none of your business when I decide to do that. But I'm not punishing ACCG. I'm rewarding my saints. And that just blessed me. That inspired me. And I shared it with our pastors on a conference call, because Satan will talk to individuals and make them think all kinds of negative things. Because all of that happened in 1 year, in a matter of months, there were people who were wondering, is ACCG cursed? Is the Lord upset with us? And as it turned out, the Lord, as I interpreted what the Spirit said to me, the Lord was very pleased with us, that he would call so many of our leaders home for reward. Now, obviously, from a human point of view, it seemed unfair because so many of our top leaders were being called home in a short period of time, in seeing that we're also a relatively small organization. But there's a scripture that says God's ways are not man's ways, neither are man's ways God's ways. So when you understand what God is doing, when he allows us to understand it, then we can at least appreciate what he's doing. So, but he also said it's time for a transition. Don't know that I would have done it that way, but then I ain't God. But that's the other part that I heard him say. So this year in the 75th Holy Convocation, we're going to fill 3 of the top positions in the organization: senior bishop, first vice bishop, and second vice bishop. So that says to me, the Lord is saying, as our theme is, it's time to shift. And part of the shifting means that we have to allow the Spirit to continue to heal us, because there is still hurt, because we're human, from what happened last year, and the healing process takes time. But what we have to understand is, if we surrender and yield to the Spirit and not try to do it ourselves, but allow the Spirit to do it in us, then we can get total and complete healing. And so the transition is, we're moving because the assignment for Bishop Laurie, the assignment for Elder Milner, the assignment for Bishop Jones, all had concluded. If the assignments had not finished, then they would still be here. But the Lord decided when that would happen. We're not able, that's above our pay grade. We're not able to make those kinds of decisions. But the question there is, with those of us who have the positions that we have, what are we going to do in terms of implementing the assignment that God has deposited into each of us individually, and then us corporately? And so again, I think the conference on church growth and leadership is going to become more important as we look at where the Lord wants us to go. And as we prepare for that conference, the Spirit will begin to unfold even more of the agenda that He wants us to have. In addition to that, the shift that occurred with the core committee of the planning for the convocation under the leadership of Bishop Conward, who is to become our first vice bishop, has been nothing short of excellent. The presentation that was made in the spring gathering in April at Greater Mount Zion, where Bishop Fuller is pastor, was the most professional, most inspiring, and most informative that I've ever seen since I've sat in this chair as a presider. So we have the people who are capable. We have the people who have the ability. So it's not the question of ability. So a lot of times it's the question of availability. Will I make myself available to the Lord to do what He is calling me to do?
Jesus is the mountain, yeah. I know that Jesus is the mountain.
Well, let me start with Bishop Carter, since he is going to be our senior bishop, and his wife, Pastor Cynthia Carter. I think they have a very unique ministry, not only as husband and wife, but as pastor and co-pastor. And the skill set that the Lord has given them, I think, enables them to work very effectively together. They've been doing this for a number of years. And one of the things that I want to keep trying to do is to be a little bit more diligent in determining what the abilities and gifts are for each pastor, and then constantly look at how can we best coalesce or pull all of these individuals together in doing the work for the Lord. So one of the things that I appreciate about Bishop Carter is that he's a very calm person. He's a very level-headed person. He's a person of a lot of wisdom. And I told him one of the things that I will rely on him as senior bishop is to give me advice from time to time. Not things that I want to hear, but things that I need to hear. I think Pastor Cynthia Carter has extraordinary gifts, especially around altar ministry, and is very effective in helping people and leading people toward deliverance. And that ministry is critically important today. Individuals, if we allow our individual prayer ministry to drop off, then Satan is right there to step in to try to burden us with things and cause us to become discouraged. So I think in this instance, They bring a lot to the ACCG. Not only that, they are so well connected with the number of people that they know, the number of pastors that they know. And so one of the things that I have asked for our pastors is to let's become more proactive in recruiting, seeking out independent churches. But one of the things you have to be aware of when you're seeking out independent churches, some churches are independent because they've been hurt. And they are reluctant a lot of times to become a part of an organization because of the abuse that they have taken in past experiences. And so we want churches to understand that that's not the approach that the ACCG takes. Bishop Conward, who will become our first vice bishop, I think has a lot of skills, but also has a church of individuals who are extremely diverse and also gifted. He is an extraordinary preacher and teacher, but I'm finding out more about his administrative skills as he serves as the chairman of our program committee for the convocation. And so I think the congregation that he pastors, as I said, in the nation's capital is a very extraordinary congregation. I have a lot of love for them because that's the church that was my first pastorate. And I think there's something to be said about your first love. And so this is the first church that I was privileged to serve as a shepherd of. But having watched some of the young adults and middle-aged adults who were children when I pastored them, it's just amazing to see how the Lord is using them now. They are grown and have children, and some of them are grandparents, but I pastored them when they were children. But that church has just simply an extraordinary congregation. But the Lord is just expanding, I think, enlarging his territory. Bishop David Fuller, who has recently come with us, I've known him practically all of his life. He's an unusually gifted preacher. He has an unusual testimony. A lot of the challenges that he has gone through, had he not been connected with the Lord the way that he has, a lesser person would have thrown up his hands and walked away. But he has taken the negatives in his life, turned them around, and now he's ministering to a lot of people who has experienced some of the same things that he has experienced. District Elder Harry Betts, I remember when he started preaching, and just looked like the Lord just gifted him initially as a seasoned preacher. The only thing that I worry about Bishop-elect Betts is that sometimes I think he overdoes it. And I constantly tell him, you know, just slow down a little bit. As he gets older, though, his body will also let him know to slow down. But he brings so much enthusiasm, so much excitement to what he does. And he has a congregation that fully supports him and in every challenge that he meets. And again, one of the things that inspires me about the pastors in ACCG is that God has given our pastors favor with so many people. And I believe at some point, others will begin to turn more toward ACCG because of the pastors that we have in the ACCG. And he's been a tremendous help. And he is going to take the same position that his late father has. His late father, Bishop Harry W. Betts, Bishop Laura, and myself were the last three bishops that Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. recommended to the office of bishop. And so we, and the three of us went in together in 1995. So his father will always have a special place in my heart because of the closeness that the Lord gave us. So I'm excited about his taking that position. Pastor Scoggins has stepped into two positions as a young pastor, and I think is doing an extraordinary job. As pastor of the church that her mother founded, and her mother sat down with me when she became near the end of her life and told me she'd been in prayer and fasting as to who should be her successor. And once she told me that her successor, the Spirit told her that her successor would be her daughter, Pastor Murray Scoggins, I said, Pastor Pettiford, don't worry, we will make sure that this is carried out the way the Lord has given it to you. And so Pastor Scoggins is growing. I can see the growth in her preaching, in her pastoring, but also as auxiliary executive for the youth and music ministries of the ACCG. And people find out that pastoring is a challenge, but it's a fulfilling challenge. It's an exciting challenge. Sometimes it's an upsetting challenge, but it's a challenge. But whatever the Lord has called you to, I believe if you constantly yield to him, he prepares you for that. Elder Robinson has stepped into a very challenging situation at St. Matthew's, succeeding our late first Vice Bishop. And as you and everybody knows, Bishop Laurie and I were very close. I had the privilege of being his pastor when the Lord called him into the ministry in 1972, I believe it was. He was serving on the deacon board at St. John Apostle Church in Winston-Salem, where I was serving as the pastor. And we laughed about it for so many years. He called me one morning about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to tell me he had been called to the ministry. And I said, Deacon, could you call me at 7 or 8 o'clock? Did you have to call me at 3 or 4 o'clock? And we laughed about that for years. But the Lord led Bishop Laurie in just developing an awesome ministry in Winston-Salem. So he was the Moses of the St. Matthew ministry, and now Elder Robinson is the Joshua. And members have to understand that Joshua's ministry is not the same as Moses. The same thing with me here at Mount Sinai. But it's unfair for anybody to expect Elder Robinson to be Bishop Laurie. That's not his calling. That's not his ministry. But the thing that I believe has helped to prepare Elder Robinson is his personal prayer ministry. If you're going to grow in the Spirit, you've got to understand that there are 2 things or more that you have to do. You have to be diligent in your Bible study, you have to be diligent in your prayer ministry, and you have to be consistent in fasting, as well as praise and worship. Those are part of the keys to growing in the Lord. Now, Pastor Lindsay is not officially with us, but she's unofficially with us, and she has a heart for the people of God. My God, there's an awesome ministry out there in Maryland. I can't think of the name of the city right now, but it's just outside of D.C. in Maryland. And so we are so excited that she has chosen to fellowship with us. She's a part of our pastor's conference call every month. And we've had planning sessions at her church. And the congregation there they've taken on the personality of their leader, which is what they should do. And they're very hospitable, they're very supportive, they're very encouraging, and we're just so grateful to her. Elder Abraham Wiley is not with us in the way that he used to be, but he's still connected to us. He's in Augusta, Georgia, and he's having some health issues right now, but Elder Wiley has been a tremendous blessing to the ACCG, he and his precious wife, Lady Julia. And we're looking forward to continuing that fellowship and expanding some more things. He and I have been in conversation, as well as his first cousin, Bishop William Wiley, down in Selma, North Carolina. A great friend, a close friend, have a phenomenal ministry. The last revival that I did on this revival circuit, if I could call it, was in Selma back in the middle of June. And the Lord just blessed us in a great, a marvelous, and a tremendous way. So we're excited. We're excited, and I think there are other ministries and pastors that are going to affiliate with the ACCG. But we want ministers to know that we are interested in ministering to you, in working with you, and seeing how we can assist you in growing your particular congregation.
I'm going with her. Chilly, hey, wind. Chilly wind, don't blow.
Succeeding Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr., I had to come to grips with the fact, and I certainly hope the congregation has come to grips with the fact, that under no circumstances could I ever fill the shoes of Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. They're just way, way, way too big for me. And I had to recognize at some point that that was not what the Lord was calling me to do. When Bishop Sr. came here, there was no building, there was nothing. And they started on the street and went into a storefront and developed a ministry over 60 years. When I became pastor, the ministry is what you see here now. A beautiful sanctuary and just a wonderful, loving, supportive congregation. One of the greatest blessings that the Lord has given me is the opportunity to pastor my home church. There are individuals in this church who grew up with me. I've got two deacons. We used to ride stick horses together, ride bicycles together, and now they call me pastor. I mean, that's overwhelming. My first babysitter was the late Mother Eva Jones, who was the first woman that I eulogized, the first person that I eulogized after becoming pastor of this church. And there are so many people in this church who knew me as a child and who have accepted me as their pastor. I mean, and there are no words to describe what kind of honor, what kind of blessing that is. So let me get emotional here. But to succeed your father at your home church is just a blessing beyond words. There are so many days and nights I've said, Lord, what in the world have I done to deserve this blessing? There's nothing that I've done, but he saw fit to put me here. And at one time, my wife and I were going to move to Philadelphia and start a ministry there. But the Lord said, that's not where I'm sending you. I'm sending you right where you are, here at Mount Sinai. And so I'm here because the Lord has mandated that I be here. And it continues to be one of the most exciting experiences in my life. I hope someday that I can make this church as proud of me as their pastor as they were of their founding pastor, Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. He stayed here for 60 years. I'll probably have to stay 120 in order to measure up to that. But I say that because he is still my role model in terms of what a pastor should be. There was a time when my father had a lot of, well, not a lot, but had some rental property. And people would jokingly say there was only one requirement to rent property from Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr. You had to be a member of Mount Sinai. But he used that to help members get started. And once they were able to get on their feet and buy their homes or whatever, and that was something that was, when I look back now, he was a visionary. He was a visionary. And so there are things that we're trying to do that will continue to keep us moving in that direction. This was one of the first congregations in the area, certainly one of the first apostolic, to have a bus and radio ministry, to have vacation Bible school, to start an educational fund, to encourage students to go on to college. And so that's the kind of foundation that we walked into in 1995 in order to build on. And so we're just, but you have to understand that times change and people change. And in terms of the challenge of pastoring, the message always stays the same, but the methods have to shift a lot of times depending on the makeup of the congregation in terms of how are we trying to reach different individuals. So we hope that Mount Sinai continues to be a role model for the other ACCG churches, but we also recognize that to whom much is given, much is required. So when you are a leader, you have to take on that responsibility. It's not enough to have the title. You have to take the responsibility that goes with the title.
How about you? Yeah. I'm going west. Chilly winds don't blow. I'm going west.
In my own particular situation, my personal family was never separated from my church family. I say that because, as I said earlier, my father and mother moved here from Winston-Salem. That's not very far now. It's only an hour's drive. But back then, it was at least a 2-hour drive. But I had no cousins, no siblings, no cousins, no aunts, no uncles, no extended family in the Martinsville, Henry County area. My closest relatives were in Winston-Salem, outside of my father, my mother, my 2 sisters. And so Mount Sinai became our extended family. Now, my father came from a very large family. Out of 14, there were 10 of them lived to get grown, 5 boys and 5 girls. But they lived, the closest was Uncle Johnny, Johnny Richardson, who was a barber in Winston-Salem, owned Nichols Barbershop, owned, I think it was Liberty at the time that he passed. But he was the closest relative. And then my mother has a sister who still lives in Winston-Salem, Aunt Mary Daniels, who goes to Christ Rescue Temple, which is my mother's home church, also Evangelist Josephine Laura's home church. So the church has always been my family. The people, as I said, that we grew up with, they were always a part of our family. As I said, they became our cousins or aunts, uncles, whatever, because we did not have any extended family here. So I grew up never separating my personal family from my church family. It was all one family. And that's the concept that I still embrace. I think it's important for people in the church to understand that a lot of times you end up being closer to your brothers and sisters in Christ than you are to natural family, especially if those in your natural family are unsaved. You see my father say so many times that there were pastors that he was as close to as if they were his brothers. And I think part of that was because none of his brothers lived here, but also because his brothers were not saved at that time. And so you just develop that bond. And I grew up in a house in terms of siblings with sisters. I had 2 natural sisters and 1 foster sister. And so my brothers growing up were members of the church, but now they're a couple of pastors, bishops who have just become just like brothers to me. And so I think that happens because the Spirit of God begins to go past certain barriers and draw us together. And I think we have to understand that we are the family of God, and it's important that we keep that aspect. But we don't separate ourselves from our natural family, but we reach out and we try to encourage them, if they're not saved, to become a part of the family of Christ. Because not only do we want to spend time with you in this life, but we want to spend time with you in the next life as well. But the only way that can happen is all of us have to be born-again Christians. And so we constantly try to encourage our natural family. But I think because we didn't have extended family, that church became the most important institution in the Richardson household growing up. And I've tried to share that with my personal family as well.
I'm going where chilly winds don't blow. Every day will be Sunday. Chilly winds don't blow.
We started dating in high school, February 1962. And that's been a long time ago. And both of us growing up in the home of preachers, I think probably helped to prepare us for what the Lord had for us, even though we didn't know it then. And she's a very talented lady. In 2 churches that I pastored, St. James and St. John, she was my minister of music. She was my choir director. She's a gifted musician. Brother Sandy Carter, my current minister of music, says Sister Gloria is one of the best traditional gospel musicians you will ever hear. When you play traditional gospel, going back before contemporary, I don't know what urban contemporary is now, but she's one of the best. And her late brother, who taught her, Daniel Harrison, was the best. He has a son we call Robert Blow Harrison, but his dad, it was amazing. That was her oldest brother. When I married her, she had 7 brothers and 1 sister. And the Lord has called 6 of her brothers home. But she has many gifts. She's a quiet person by nature, but when she says something, she means it. She doesn't ever say something just to placate somebody. She's the kind of person who's very genuine, who's very authentic, and when she says it, she means it. If she doesn't mean it, she's not going to say it. She has been so helpful in sharing with me things that I need to be concerned about, that I need to be aware of. A woman has a different perspective a lot of times than a man. While I'm looking at while I'm looking at the big picture in many instances, she's able to zero in on very specific things and said, you may want to think about this for this, or you may want to think about this for that. And over the years, her wisdom has proved to be accurate and valid. And so that's something that you always appreciate. You always, sometimes you don't want to hear it, but then when you get alone and think about it, you realize it's right, it's accurate, that's good advice.
I will have no wind, chilly winds don't blow. Will you meet me there? Chilly winds.
One of the things that I want to do is to take time to thank so many individuals who worked way above and beyond the call of duty. In my comments in the convocation program, in addition to thanking our pastors, our auxiliary executives, our bishops, and our national officers, I single out 4 people whom I feel have done an extraordinary job this year. One is Brother Silas Presley. Another is Sister Hayes' husband, Elder James Hayes, Sister Carolyn Harris, and my sister, Sister Mary Mason, who has been my church administrator for a number of years and had my back even as a little boy. When Daddy would whip me, she would cry until Daddy stopped whipping me. So needless to say, my sister cried a whole lot. But there are other individuals that I want to talk about. I want to talk about Bishop Conward and the core committee. I want to talk about other individuals who have worked so hard for this convocation to come about. I want to express profound appreciation to our guest preachers, our guest facilitators for the workshops. These individuals have really come together, and then ultimately the delegates who support the convocation and our visiting brothers and sisters who come. I think before I get to marching orders, we've got to spend some time saying thank you, because as you know, this has been over a year, or right at a year, in putting together. We started talking about this before Convocation 2015, and the core committee worked diligently every month. We were having pastors' conference calls every month. We were doing revivals at our sister churches, and we were having fasting and prayer. So a lot of different people have been very important in what has transpired. All of our pastors, God knows, we could not have done anything without their support. And so I just want to take some time, and I'm going to be saying it more than once, to say thank you. Mount Sinai for hosting, for the committees that are here who have volunteered their time, and most of the people who are here have volunteered their time, and that's something that you cannot pay for. I mean, how do you pay somebody who says, Bishop, I want to do this because I love the church and I love the Lord? And when people say that touches you. I mean, it blesses you. And so I want to take a good bit of time, perhaps between July 19th and July the 23rd, they'll probably say, okay, Bishop, we're tired of hearing that, we're tired. But I want people to know this is something that I don't take for granted. I mean, people, I look at the time that I've been able to spend with you and your wife, time that you didn't have to give, but you gave. And that kind of sacrifice, that kind of dedication, that kind of commitment has been, that kind of participation has been repeated over and over and over by so many different people. And I want others to know who may not be as active in helping to plan and carry out our convocation, that we want you to come on board, because it's exciting, it's challenging, you get upset sometimes, you get irritated, what's wrong with that bishop, you know. But there is a certain level that God requires of me, and that level is excellence. And I have to always be mindful of the fact that this is God's work. When I was working at Danville Community College, a job I thoroughly loved, I always sought to be excellent in everything that I did there. I dare not do anything less for the Lord, because it was He who empowered me to get the positions that I've had, that I've been blessed to have. So I cannot do less in working for Him, because the harvest is truly plenteous, but the laborers are few.
I'm gonna hide behind the mountain. I'm gonna hide behind the mountain. I'm gonna hide behind the mountain. I'm going where the chilly wind don't blow. Something else I came to realize, I know that Jesus is the mountain. I know that Jesus is the mountain. Yeah. I know that Jesus is the mountain. I'm going where the chilly wind.